Let's start with the mouthpiece. First of all, and most obviously, you should always remove your reed when you finish playing to allow it and the mouthpiece to dry more quickly. Otherwise, that damp, dark environment inside the mouthpiece is an ideal home for any number of pathogens that you wouldn't want near your mouth. The mouthpiece itself can be cleaned regularly in warm water and soap. Every few weeks is a good schedule for most people. If you have a mouthpiece brush, that's an ideal tool. But if you don't, you can also use a toothbrush. Just make sure the toothbrush itself is clean. When you're done, pat the mouthpiece dry and then allow it to air dry completely outside the case for a few hours. Especially make sure you dry off the cork. The adhesive that holds the cork on shouldn't be affected by water, which is good news. But you do want it to dry as quickly as possible to prevent anything from growing in those pores in there. If you have a hard rubber mouthpiece, sometimes cleaning it in water can cause it to discolor, especially if you use water that's too warm. That discoloration is a sign that the rubber has been exposed to UV light, and while it might look weird, it's usually not a problem and you can keep using that mouthpiece. Your repair tech may be able to help you restore the original color. The most effective way to clean your instrument is to swab it out when you're done playing. Make sure the swab that you use is designed specifically for clarinets. It'll be thick enough to make good contact with the entire bore as you pull it through, but not so thick that it might get stuck. There are two protrusions in the upper joint under the register key and the thumb tube that could cause a swab that's too large to snag. Before you pull the swab through, always inspect the string and the swab itself to make sure there are no knots. I'm sure you've used a swab before, but you just drop it through and then pull. Once you've done that, look down the bore to see if it looks dry. If it still looks wet, continue to swab it until it looks dry. That'll be easier to tell on a plastic clarinet because the bore in a plastic clarinet will be perfectly smooth. On a wood clarinet, there will be grain and imperfections that might make it a little bit harder to see. Finally, if your swab itself starts to look dirty, you can throw it in the washer in a delicates bag and wash it with the rest of your laundry. The other best practice to adopt for instrument cleanliness is to wash your hands before and after you play. It's straightforward, but it deserves mentioning. For some people, the oils on their hands can cause premature wear or corrosion of the mechanism, but for the rest of us, it's just good to avoid getting any foreign dirt or contaminants on your instrument. Other things you can do to keep your instrument clean are to wipe down the exterior, especially if you've been playing outside on a hot day or under the lights of a stage and your hands are sweaty. Just use a clean, lint-free rag and be careful of the pads as you wipe. There's no need to use any sort of polishes or cleaning agents. If you notice buildup in the chimneys, which are what we call these raised tubes that your fingers seal against, you can clean them out with a Q-tip. Now let's talk about a few common problems that you could diagnose and fix at home. First, if your clarinet has lost a tenon cork, or if a piece of tenon cork has broken off, don't attempt to reglue it. Just take some masking tape or painter's tape, wrap it around the tenon, and then grease it generously with cork grease. Check the fit, add or remove tape as needed, and that can last anywhere from a few days to a few weeks. Let's talk about a few problems with the mechanism that you could diagnose and address. If it seems like the clarinet has stopped working completely and you've already inspected your reed and your mouthpiece for chips and cracks, see if you can play a middle A with just this finger down, no register key. If you can play that note but nothing else, check this screw that's between the A flat and A keys. If it's tightened too far, it will hold the A flat key open, causing a leak that will then affect everything below that on the instrument, which is almost all of the instrument. To address it, take a screwdriver and simply back that screw out. You want to have a small gap between the A key and the screw. That's exaggerated, but you can see that the A key has a little bit of travel before it contacts the screw. It's probably further out than you want it, but it will resolve the problem. Hopefully you can see that. That's a little closer to what we want. We just want a very small gap. Next, if you can play notes in your left hand but nothing in the right hand, check the alignment of the bridge key. You want to make sure that the bridge itself is properly aligned, and then also check to see if these two posts are properly aligned. If they're not, that can cause this key to be held open, and that'll create a leak, which will then affect everything below it on the instrument, which is the rest of the lower joint. If everything does look like it's properly lined up and it's still not working, that could be an indication that this upper bridge is bent, and that's something that you would probably need to have a technician take a look at. The third and final common problem we'll discuss would be that you can play C using this key on the lower joint, but not B. Or maybe you can play B, but you have to use both pinkies to hold both of those keys closed. Check the regulation between those two keys, which happens right here on this piece called the crow's foot. If you close the B key and check and see that the C key isn't closing entirely, that's an indication that there's an issue here. It's possible that this key may have become bent. There are two ways to deal with it. One is that you can layer masking tape or painter's tape or even little pieces of post-it note on the bottom side of this lever to take up the space until you see that both keys are being closed together when you push that B lever. Or, if you're feeling brave, you can attempt to bend the key back. This isn't something to attempt if you're not comfortable with it, but what we would do is brace the C key closed with one thumb and then gently flex up on the crow's foot with the other thumb. You can see I'm not trying to bend the key so much as I'm just flexing it up and then allowing it to spring back. Most clarinets have keys that are springy enough that they'll respond to this. It may take a couple minutes to feel just the right amount of force, but it's better to go slowly and not move it enough than to move it too far. Let's see. It's closer. Go a little bit further. Just flexing up on that key. There we go. Now when I push the B down, both keys close completely. It may take a little bit of back and forth to find just the right spot. One final note about home repair: if your thumb rest should become detached from your instrument and you can't reattach it with the original screws, don't attempt to reattach it in some other way. If you use screws that are too long, they could protrude into the bore and cause air to leak out. Or if you try to glue the thumb rest, it can shear off and take some of the body material with it. It's best to wait until you can get it into a repair shop. Hope you found this information helpful, but if you have further questions or an issue that I didn't cover here, please reach out and I'll do whatever I can to help you. If I've edited this video properly, my contact information should again be appearing at the bottom of the screen. Stay safe and thanks for watching.